everyone, and welcome to the November Coaches and Professionals panel for the Hidden Opponent. This month, we are joined by two wonderful panelists from Athlete Ally and You Can Play to discuss a little bit more about LGBTQIA education and how coaches and professionals can be the best ally for their athletes and colleagues. So I'm going to start by having our panelists introduce themselves. Joanna, if you could start, talk a little bit more about yourself, Athlete Ally, and why you're passionate about LGBTQIA education.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Joanna Hoffman. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Director of Communications at Athlete Ally, which is a national nonprofit working to make sports inclusive for LGBTQI plus athletes at all levels of sport. We work in education, policy, athlete activism, and research to identify barriers and obstacles to inclusion and to mobilize the athletic community to use their positions of power to speak out for inclusion whenever and however possible. And I forgot the second part of your question.
Why you're passionate specifically about LGBTQIA plus education?
I'm passionate about LGBTQIA plus education because I believe education is the foundation of activism. Education provides us with a blueprint on where our own gaps are to understanding how best to navigate the pathways to inclusion, how best to identify who can be our partners and collaborators in this work, and where we can go from here to build upon what we've learned from past challenges and to maximize our success moving forward.
Great. We are so happy to have you. Kurt, I'm going to pass it to you, ask you the same questions. And if you could explain a little bit more about You Can Play.
Sure. My name is Kurt Weaver, and I'm the COO of You Can Play project. And we, I guess, much like Athlete Ally, are working in the inclusion space within sports. Maybe a little bit of the variation. We tend to partner with organizations and leagues and teams to then hopefully increase their inclusion efforts. And so, we're trying to work within their existing structures, or be it a league structure or a team structure, in order to create those opportunities, those spaces, and hopefully utilize the massive reach of sport out into the greater community to both trumpet inclusion and push the initiatives, but then also work internally with those organizations to make sure they're doing what they can to make sure their stadiums, their teams, their coaching staffs, and otherwise are inclusive places for everyone to be able to participate. And I think probably my passion for the work comes from a place of youth sport development, which is where I spend a lot of my time. And I see this as a growth of sport, as a health of sport issue, just like it is, a sense of belonging is everything for a big chunk of the world. But I see sport being that. I love sports so much, and I know what it can bring in value, and I want that for everybody who wishes to participate. And I think that's that's the end that I come from the passion end of it, to make sure that sport is big and healthy, and that means that it's going to have to be expanding into diverse communities. And I think that's one of those things that we can do probably better every day.
Definitely. Well, we are so happy to have you both and to learn more about both of your organizations. So the first question that I have for coaches and professionals, what does it mean for them to be an ally? How can allyship be appropriately communicated to their athletes, to their colleagues, to their friends, things like that? Kurt, I will start with you.
It's an interesting thought around the specifically sport and coaches and staff being allyship. I think ally is recognizing the reach that your voice has and what influence you can make. And what I always like to say is that it's the prehab. It's not waiting until something's happening. It's utilizing your voice up front to know I can make something easier. I can make change. I can make it better. I can make it more welcoming for a community, an individual within the system that I'm going to be able to control. So that could be my team, that could be my school, could be my department. But I think that's where the ally voice for me is recognizing the reach and the influence my voice carries and utilizing it to then for the good. I like to say that there's those people who believe you should have to go through what I went through in order to do the thing I'm doing, or you should never have to go through the thing I went through. And I think that's where it falls. That's the biggest dividing line on those who I would consider allies and those who are not. And it's unfortunate that there are still people who believe that, it was tough on me, so it's going to be tough on you. And that's a disappointment. But I'm heartened to see that I think more people are saying, listen, we could skip over all that, and you can learn from what I had to go through, and hopefully I can make it better and more welcoming and easier. And that's I've seen advancements within sport because of that. So I love those athlete or those ally voices because of those spaces.
Yeah, definitely. I love that you brought up prehab. It's actually something that we bring up a lot in our like various panels on various topics, whether it be mental health, inclusion, really anything. We talk about just like being proactive about issues. So I think that's so important, and I'm glad you brought it up. Joanna, I'm going to pass it to you. Is there anything you would like to add about that of being an ally?
Yeah, and I love what Kurt said, and just to, kind of echo that and add to that, I see being an ally as a constant everyday process of examining our own power and privilege and looking at how we can actively leverage that power and privilege to center and amplify people who have traditionally been silenced or been marginalized in different ways. That means taking the time to learn, to quietly listen, and to let the group you're seeking to be an ally to really lead the way in telling you what they need and how you can best support them. And I think specifically around athletics, being an ally means investing in education for yourself and for your athletes, and taking the time to learn about why sports is and traditionally has been an unsafe and unwelcoming place for LGBTQI plus people. I mean, we know that LGBTQI plus athletes are twice as likely to drop out of sports, that more than 80% of LGBTQ youth aren't out to their coaches. And that really reflects, first of all, like a dire need for action and for education, and also a systemic problem within sports that allies play a really key role in addressing.
Definitely. And those statistics are so important to bring up because it is such a huge issue. And those statistics represent that very, very well. So how can coaches and professionals promote inclusivity within their teams and best support their athletes? I know there's probably not a one size fits all for like all situations, but how do you think coaches can best support their athletes and colleagues? Joanna, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first step there is really, like I mentioned, getting educated, understanding the lived experiences of LGBTQ people. I think from there, I think thinking about the words that they use and having a zero tolerance policy when it comes to anti-LGBTQ words. The reason I say that is because so many people shrug off what we think of as locker room talk as just words and something that doesn't matter. But yet we know from talking to athletes that hearing locker room talk is what kept them closeted for so many years. It's what made them drop out of sports because it sent them the message that they weren't safe or welcome on their team, that it wasn't a place where they could be who they are. And it's really important that we address that aspect of the systemic culture of sports so that a different message is being sent, so that coaches are really championing inclusion. And I think beyond there, steering away from gendered language, developing non-discrimination policies and fan codes of conduct and transgender inclusion policies, hosting pride games so that the LGBTQ community sees very visible and clear support from the sport that they love. I think all of those are different ways that can signal inclusion and celebration of the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, I like Joe, like what Joanna's saying. I do appreciate the language is one of those things. It's key to what it is, and I think Joanna, I'm sure you have the same experience. A lot of coaches that we end up talking to or educating believe that they're going to be asked to walk in a parade and wave a flag, like that they're thinking that we're going to come to them with some sort of crazy ask, and it's going to take a big amount of effort. And what I find is that the small stuff done consistently over time, that's the difference. That's inclusion, right? And so if you're paying attention to your words, if you're putting on a pin or a patch or somewhere with that visibility and it's consistently there, that's the biggest difference that you can make. It's not the one-time flash event that you did and we all went behind it and then we don't live it the rest of the year. I think that's the ongoing thing that we see a lot of the difference in that I'd add to Joanna's comments. But yeah, that sport language is an interesting thing. And I think it's there's actually a website, it's nohomophobes.com, that it kind of tracks 4 terms on Twitter that get used live every day. And it's tracked back to, I think it started in 2012 is when the site popped up. So you can go all the way back there and you can see the spikes of when it's used more. And unfortunately on those days are usually a sport event is starting off or kicking off or it's happening. So it's going to be a World Cup or an Olympics, games are kicking off or a Super Bowl or something's happening in sport. And again, it's like, is sport homophobic? Absolutely not. Does a terminology bear that out? Well, no, because a lot of what we're using to talk smack ends up in that space. So it's it's a tough one.
Yeah, I think visibility is so important, and kind of going off what you said of like coaches viewing requests as like big asks and like feeling like they have to do this whole big parade to be able to represent their activism. I do want to talk about the difference between performance activism and true activism and what that line kind of looks like for coaches and professionals. I know it's one that a lot of people tread in various issues. So I really want to get your perspective on that and how you think coaches can make their intentions clear as a true activist instead of a performance activist.
I'll hop in on that one first. I would say we all were at practice the first day in a sport we weren't good at or didn't know, and so your first day of activism is going to be performative. It's going to be your first step on the journey. So I think a lot of times people will skip anything for fear that they're going to do something inauthentic or wrong or bad or take a misstep. And listen, our first day of practice, we were all horrible. So just remember back to that and know this is no different. So I think your first day is going to be performative, but it becomes not performative very quickly if you start to live it and it becomes consistent across your team, your league, your actions. So is it something to where you made the statement, you wrote the great athlete policy, we had everybody sign the code of conduct, and then we didn't talk about it again until the end of the season, or when something happened in a locker room and now I have to address it, I came back to it. Well, that's not living what you're doing here. And so I like to say that you can do all the recruiting you want for diverse populations, for LGBTQIA population, for diverse backgrounds, but is your retention good on that side too? And so are you measuring yourself against retention? Because that's going to be the difference on what you're either performative or you're just you're digging into the work and you're authentic about your approach. I think authenticity is going to breed retention for your athletes, for your coaching staff, for your medical staff, for anybody who wants to be around you. And you're going to see it very quickly. So I'd say it's maybe Joanna has some examples of what we've seen around authentic work. I would say I don't think I can give you one example that is authentic on its face. It's your approach to the work in general. So any part of it can be a sign on the wall, can be the most inauthentic thing possible, or the most authentic tool when you use it. And I'd refer to the believe sign in Ted Lasso's office, right? So like if you're a fan there, like that's a very cheesy sign in many offices or in many locker rooms around the country that just gets pointed at because we popped it up. When you utilize it and you live it and you make it part of your ethos, it's a very authentic thing. And I think there's a lot of those tools that can be used in both ways.
Definitely. Joanna, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that I think it's, for me, we go beyond performance activism when it's what happens when no one's looking, and what happens when the camera is turned off. And I think a lot of that comes down to sometimes uncomfortable discussions that people have with teammates, with family members, with folks in their lives about why they care about LGBTQ inclusion. And those kind of conversations really move the needle in a lot of ways. And also those conversations that people have internally within athletic departments move the needle. And so I think beyond, I think about on a college campus, for example, a team holding a pride game is wonderful, and that's a great thing to happen. But what I like to see from there is that they then are talking with their athletic staff and developing policies so that LGBTQ athletes are protected from discrimination, so that transgender athletes are able to participate on teams, so that LGBTQ fans don't have to fear being discriminated against at games, really systematizing protections so that it's not just about waving a banner, for example, but it's about ensuring that values around inclusion are made a part of the team and athletic department culture, or in the sense of a professional team within that team and fan culture as well.
Definitely. I know, Joanna, you mentioned like policies previously, and I think as Title IX celebrated its 50th anniversary recently, I did want to kind of go into Title IX, and for people that like aren't super educated on Title IX, are there any like regulations within Title IX that protect LGBTQIA athletes? Like how does Title IX kind of like play into this discussion?
I mean, I will caveat this by saying I'm not a Title IX expert. I think groups that like the Women's Sports Foundation has a lot of great resources around Title IX. I will say that Title IX it prohibits sex-based discrimination in education, and that extends to then that extends to LGBTQI plus students as well. It protects LGBTQ survivors of sexual abuse and violence. And it also provides protection to LGBTQ students who are facing bullying and harassment, which certainly applies in situations of LGBTQ students in gym class, in locker rooms. And I think a misconception that some folks have is that the recently released guidance from the Department of Education created new rights for transgender students. But what it actually did is it clarified existing rights that were already there for transgender students under Title IX. So the law hasn't changed there. Transgender students are still protected by Title IX, which means they have the right to equal access to educational opportunities, including access to spaces and activities that are consistent with their gender identity.
Yeah, I'd only add, I think the frustrating part is that how this far into Title IX are we having to go back and re-clarify who's going to be protected, and like we have to add some additional language? Come on, like is this truly? And I guess I always reference that lady holding up the sign like that. We still have to protest this shit. Like that it's amazing it's still happening, and we have to then revisit what is an amazing piece of legislation that brought so much opportunity. Nowhere near at all that work being finished, but at least it got the conversation going. And the fact that we have to go back, re-clarify, and re-add some language into it, or even consider, the clarification of language in there in order to make sure people understand what it's meaning, is I think it's just it's an indication as to where the conversation is in 2023 today, which is, I think probably all of us on this call are a little head shaking around that kind of stuff. But I think for Title IX and then really where I appreciate it is the conversation around sport where this has happened. I think people start from a place of inclusion a lot more than they have in the past. Instead of its absolute exclusion, and we'll see who we let in, it's now at least from a place of inclusion in many cases. And so school administrators and university administrators being some of those that at least are, I think, starting from a place where we want to see how this can fit and work, instead of how do we exclude. And that's, the exclusivity of sport is actually a benefit to it. And I think that hopefully I hear that conversation changing a lot, which I still encourage it changing even more. The elite sport aspect of it has sort of kicked the participation side of sport in the pants a few times, and it's been rough to see that we are utilizing elite sport rules and models to then legislate and have issue with a community and fun sport, and that's always a tough one for us to take. And there's an issue every day around that where you hear somebody saying, "Well, I saw it on TV, so of course it needs to happen in my second graders' field down the street."
Yeah, I think that's a super important clarification. And I think that, again, Title IX celebrating 50 years, like there has been a lot of great work that has been done with it, but there's, like you said, still a lot more work to be done in the future. And I think this is an area where Title IX can really do more work to protect their athletes. So viewers interested in learning more about how to be an ally, what resources from your organizations or outside organizations would you recommend that they look into?
I'll start with something Joanna said. Have a conversation with the athlete at a first level. So if you want to be a good ally or be a good friend, frankly, and be a good human, the first thing to do is have a real conversation with somebody that it's impacting and learn what that actually means. Because I think a lot of times, again, coaches believe that they're going to be asked some sort of big sweeping change or change your entire way that you coach or approach things. And truly, it's not that way. And athletes, for the most part, when either they're coming out to their coaches or first then sharing about their transitions, the first thing, of course, coaches leap to a solution, which is how do I fix the problem? How do I make sure and they're leaping to something that they don't need to leap into. In most cases, have a conversation with your athlete. That's going to indicate how you can best support that athlete. But to the stat Joanna referenced as well, you don't get to have that conversation if you've not been an open ally or at least shown that you're a safe place to be, because they're not going to talk to you about it, which again, maybe worst case scenario, you're participating with an athlete that went their entire career through your coaching and didn't ever bring up to you about their personal life. So I think that's a challenge in it. And so I'd say probably for coaches, the first one is the individual athlete, or hopefully you have some proximity to some members of the community. But then certainly there's lots of information online. Both Athlete Ally's website and our websites are great resources for it. I would also say that there's some amazing resources out there from organizations like GLSEN and GLAAD and Trevor Project that do more what I'd say generic information. It's more societal based and more maybe academic school side of things. And that's actually a lot of really valuable information. So they tend to dive a step a little deeper into what some of these things mean. So if you really want to gain some deep knowledge in there, and I'm actually heartened to see that universities are offering curriculum within what they're offering. There's more things that in professional development days for PE teachers, we went in and did a little session there. Like they're actually having these kind of conversations. So the information's out there if you want to seek it out. And I think that's the first thing is just the gain a basic knowledge from hopefully your community around you. And that's gonna be that key. It's gonna connect into authenticity of what you're doing. It's gonna connect into actually making a positive difference and not just, again, a sign on the wall saying you're all included that didn't do anything at all.
Yeah, I really want to add to that. I was actually a resident assistant in college, and we do like all types of diversity training. And the school has so many more recent, as we're talking about like collegiate athletics and athletics in general. College institutions have so many resources that so many students and athletes are just completely unaware of, or coaches as well. And really just doing that extra research to like take a step out into the counseling center, into the diversity, equity, and inclusion office, and seeing what resources they have available or what resources they can connect you with is so impactful, because their professional's full-time job, they are more than happy to provide resources. And in my personal experience, it's been so helpful. So for coaches watching, I really want to recommend and emphasize that, because it can be really impactful. Joanna, do you have anything to add?
I mean, I think in addition to You Can Play's website and our website, we have on our website, on our resource page, we have an ally guide for sports leaders. We also just re-released a free online curriculum for student athletes and coaches and administrators. That's a series of video modules around learning about the experiences of LGBTQI+ athletes and learning how to develop inclusive policies and sustain inclusive cultures, team cultures. I would also say Chris Mosier's website, transathlete.com, is a really great resource. He does a breakdown of different policies in different states and at different levels of competition. And finally, I would say, wherever you are in the country, reaching out to your state LGBTQ organization. There's multiple in every state, and I think that's a great way to plug into your local community and to get a sense of what the local immediate and long-term needs are and how you can be involved in supporting that cause.
Definitely. So for viewers interested in learning more about your organization specifically, how can they get in contact with you? How can they find more information?
So for us, our website is athleteally.org. The new curriculum that I just mentioned is at athleteally.org/COI. And we are also on social media at Athlete Ally.
Yeah, we try to keep it easy as well. So just youcanplay.org, and then our socials as well is a good resource, or at least to connect with us and have the conversation. And I think as well, I'd offer connect with your local sports organizations too, and ask the question. And frankly, Athlete Ally and You Can Play get invited in a lot of times when there's a challenge or when an organization is getting a little pressure from the community to do something. I wish it was no, we're going to do the right thing. We're going to go out and find this. So we always appreciate when you call your local organization and ask, what are you up to? What are you doing? Are you working with one of these organizations? Are you actually reaching out for help? Because it certainly helps our organizations to then get a welcomed call from them to say, hey, we'd like a little help on this.
Definitely prehabbing, doing the work before it's necessary. But thank you both so much for joining us. We are very excited to share this with our audience. And I know I really want to recommend both You Can Play and Athlete Ally to all of our viewers, because truly you guys do some amazing work, and we are so happy to be able to share and promote this. But yeah, so thank you so much.
Thanks, team.
Thank you so much.